T-minus 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Right now, you're looking at the final boss battle between Ben 10 and Azimuth in a game named Ben. A card game based on sumo slammers from the show in which you battle through various tournaments, collecting gold, buying and upgrading new aliens using that gold in order to take down your opponents until inevitably you face Azimuth in the finals of the Galactic Tournament. Now this sounds like a pretty cool game, but sadly, as you probably already read the title, it's undownloadable to new people. But if you specifically have an account that had downloaded the game before it became delisted and an old device with an older iOS version that can run the game like myself, you can still play it. So today I aim to 100% Ben 10 Slammers, unlocking every alien card, beating Azimuth in order to become the Ben 10 Slammers champion, and along the way figuring out the most broken strategy possible. Oh, and quickly, about 88% of people who watch my videos aren't actually subscribed, so if you end up enjoying the video, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Okay, that's enough introductions. Let's begin. If you've played this game at any point in the past, you might get hit with a wave of nostalgia looking at the starting screen, where you can either select to go play or look at your slammers. And slammers mainly refers to all the aliens you can use in the game, which at first you can see we're given Heat Blast, Feedback, and Blocks. But scrolling downwards, you'll see that all the slammers aren't specifically Ben 10 aliens, but there's other characters like Billy Billions and Zombozo in there as well. Though for now, the only ones that matter are the ones that we had unlocked, so I was looking at them, and if you look underneath the card to the right, you'll see that they have support cards, and the support cards are probably the most important thing in the entire game, as they usually affect the end result of a match more than the actual aliens do. But this is all better explained if we actually jump into the first match, where we're greeted by Rook, who if you're unfamiliar is actually Ben 10's partner in Ben 10 Omniverse after Gwen and Kevin left the team. And this conversation between them is basically Rook explaining to us that the Galactic Tournament is happening today, and Ben explaining that there's literally no way he'd lose since the game is named after him. Then Rook says that we'd face many tough opponents, both friend and foe, human and alien, and that we should head to our first match in Bellwood, which is the main town that they live in the show. Which heading over there, our first battle is actually against Grandpa Max. And clicking continue, we're brought over to this screen where we're asked to select our slammers in a 1, 2, and 3 order. This basically decides what your first slammer sent out is. And for now, since I only had 3 aliens, I chose those 3 and put Heat Blast at the number 1 spot. And before the battle actually began, we had a little conversation with Grandpa Max, basically confused as to why he was competing, explaining that this battle was a little unfair since Ben had been playing sumo slammers his whole life, but Grandpa Max says that this game's a little bit different and he's going to give us a few tips, hinting that this first battle would be a tutorial. And diving in, we first saw this screen where it said welcome to Ben 10 Slammers, and the next slide told us that the goal of the game is to defeat your opponent by knocking out all 3 of their characters known as slammers. On your turn, you can use your currently active slammer to attack your opponent's active slammer, and then of course you can also use support cards when it's your turn to help you against your opponent. Then lastly, in order to win, you have to defeat all 3 of your opponent's slammers. And reading these, the battle started. We were given some support cards, and our Heat Blast card had a glowing border around it, meaning that we could use an attack with it. So after looking at what all my support cards did, I clicked on Heat Blast, seeing that we only had one of its moves unlocked since we hadn't upgraded it and used it on the opponent's blocks, which dealt 3 damage, but if you look at the blocks card, you'll see that we also burned it. And my last move before ending my turn was playing the support card, which reduces incoming damage by 2, and it stays there for 3 turns. Now, not every support card stays there for 3 turns. Like this one our opponent played is an instant use, giving him 3 support points and drawing him 1 extra support card. There's some that stay for 2 turns all the way up to 8 turns, but I'll explain those when we use them, of course. As for now, our opponent was just using this plumber badge card, giving him even more support points, and then he used his extended punch attack with his blocks that normally does 5 damage, but it only dealt 3 to us because of our support card. And as our turn started, you might have seen there that we gained 4 more support points, and that comes directly from our Heat Blast card, because every slammer, when they're active, has a different amount of support points that they give you, and Heat Blast in our situation gives us 4. Also, every slammer has 4 different attacks that it can use, but to unlock the other 3, you have to level up your slammer, so we'll get to start using those a little later on. And for now, we're stuck with just using the most basic attack, which is usually pretty good, but later on we start seeing some pretty powerful ones. Oh, and this turn I couldn't use any support cards because if you look at the bottom, you'll see that they're all too expensive, as I only had 5 support points. And it seems that my opponent was in the same situation as he attacked without using any support cards, ending its turn and getting dealt 5 damage from our burn effect. And since support points carry over from turn to turn, it meant that we had 9 to work with. We had a few 8 cost cards, which this one gives you an extra support card every turn, but then you also have to return one back to your deck. There was Kevin's card that cost 5 points, but it made you draw 2 character support cards, and the support card that actually caught my attention was one that I couldn't use yet, so I ended up just using Heat Blast attack one more time, transferring over to our opponent's turn, who right off the bat used a Perpetual blast, which costs 3 but also deals 3 damage to me. But since we still had that one support card in play, it only dealt 1, and then Blocks' attack was still only dealing 3. And right here, Blocks actually ended up dying from the burn effect, which then Grandpa Max put into play Diamond Head. But even Diamond Head didn't stand much of a chance at this point, as I could now play this support card, which dealt 12 damage, and it forced me to discard a card from my hand. So before doing so, I used the 0 cost support card, which gave me 3 support points and an extra card, which gave me another one of the same card, so I used it again, bringing me all the way up to 19 points. And then I used the MK12 blaster, which dealt 12 damage to Diamond Head and forced me to discard a card from my hand, so I chose this one. And just like that, the opponent's Diamond Head was down to 6 health and didn't even have a chance to attack yet, which is exactly why I mentioned at the beginning that the support cards end up being way more powerful than the actual aliens. Oh, and you might have noticed that I used the Kevin's car support card, which originally I thought just gave me 2 random character support cards, but surprisingly it allows you to pick 2 of any character support card you want from your entire deck, which ends up making it probably one of the more overpowered cards in the game, as it allows you to choose nearly anything you want. But you might have noticed here that there's some support cards missing, like the one that reduces 2 damage, and that's because that one specifically isn't a character support card, but it's actually a device support card. And there isn't actually much of a difference between the device and the character ones, because they act the same way, and it's more so just to categorize them as either being a character from the show, or for the device it's usually a random item or a weapon from the show. But looking back at the battle, you'll see that Diamond Head used a spike attack, which dealt 5 damage, and the support card that they played also dealt 4 damage, but then Diamond Head ended up dying since it had the burn on him. So we were technically up 2-0 even though our Heat Blast was down to 3 HP, which you probably already noticed, but you can look at the HP if you look to the left of the card. There's the green bar which indicates how much is left, and for the exact amount you just look at the number at the top of the bar. Also, I think that's about it for the basic tutorial of the game, as if you're unfamiliar with the game, you should have a small understanding of what's going on, and the rest of the things that could be explained are either all the different aliens and their attacks, the rest of the support cards that I haven't used, and lastly all the different status effects that can be applied to your opponent or to yourself. But those, of course, I'll start explaining as we go through all the different battles and all the different tournaments, because explaining them all in one battle would be a little overwhelming. And for now, looking back at the battle, we'd actually just lost Heat Blast and decided to send in Blocks. And you'll see that with Blocks, he actually gives us 7 support points instead of the 4 that Heat Blast gave us. Of course, that comes at the cost of Blocks' attack dealing less damage, being 5, compared to Heat Blast is 8 if you count the burn damage. So there is ups and downs, but I would argue that getting 3 extra support points is better than dealing 3 extra damage. And eventually, after dealing one last attack, we had taken down all 3 of Grandpa Max's slammers, getting us the victory in 5 gold credits. Now, if you remember, some of the slammers cost upwards of 200 gold credits, but don't worry, we start earning a lot more credits very quickly, as every battle we face from now on gives us more and more. And speaking of battles, our next opponent was Kevin, but before I faced him, I went back into the slammer shop just to look around at things and saw that I could actually upgrade one of my characters, which even though I didn't use feedback in the battle, I saw that his support cards were much better than the other 2, so I decided to use my 5 golden credits to upgrade him to level 2, unlocking another attack and giving him 2 extra HP. Also, I was very interested in all the different slammers that existed, so I started looking around, specifically for cards like Billy Billions, which gave you 9 support points, or even Gray Matter that gave you 10, which was the most in the game, but I knew that they'd definitely be very weak in the damage department, so I would need to find some characters that had good support points and very good damage, which at this point I didn't look too deep into it, but later on I do find some pretty interesting ones. And for now, with our upgraded feedback, it was time to fight Kevin. And if you look to the right, you'll see that on his team, Kevin had some pretty strong attackers like Forearms and Humongosaur, and he tells us that he doesn't usually mess with games like this, but he couldn't resist a chance to kick our butt. So the battle starts off with us getting our support cards and having feedback as our opener against Kevin, and his feedback as his opener as well. But the advantage we usually have in literally every single battle is that we get to go first. Honestly, there probably should have been like a coin flip or something that decided who got to go first, as it is a pretty big advantage, but since it does favor me, I don't really mind that much. And looking here, you'll see that I had had the Spark Storm ability unlocked for feedback, and there's like a glowing bar underneath it, and that glowing bar is an ability point. And you'll see the ability points looking at the feedback card right at the bottom. And basically how they work is at the start of your turn, you get one ability point on the active slammer. And when we get feedback to a higher level, you'll see that its other two abilities cost even more ability points. So basically you just have to wait a few turns in order to use them. Oh, and the game right here was giving us a little tutorial on what status effects were, which if you look to the right, you'll see all 10 that exist within the game, but I'll mention them more specifically when we start inflicting them. As for now, since we both had a feedback, we're both inflicting shock on each other, and the shock ability at the end of your turn reduces your support points by the amount of shock that you have. Basically, since I have one shock on my feedback, my support point's gonna get reduced by 1. But let's just say hypothetically I had a shock of 5, my support points would get reduced by 5 at the end of my turn, but then that shock number would go down to 4. And then at the end of the next turn, the support points would go down by 4 and the number would go down to 3. So basically the shock status effect counts down every single turn and can be pretty annoying if you let it stack too much. But to be 100% honest, that's not a problem we really ever run into. And looking back at the game, you can see that it was my turn now and I had 8 support points. And since my feedback was getting pretty low on health, I decided to play this character card named Hang In There, which heals my slammer 2 every single round for 6 rounds. Also, we'd finally taken down Kevin's feedback, which put us in a pretty good position as we had a lot of support cards to work with, and we had an Azimuth support card down, which gives us 2 extra support cards every single round. Also, Kevin had sent in his forearms to attack, which dealt 8 damage, but since we'd used the heal card, I actually survived with 1 HP, which is a pretty big deal as it lets me do 1 whole extra attack with my feedback before it gets taken down. Now looking through my support cards, I played this one named the Rook Blanco Snare, which deals 5 damage and puts stun 1 on the opponent. And at this point, I'd assume that stun 1 meant that the forearms couldn't attack on its next turn, and I'll explain why. But quickly right here, I'd use this card named Omnitrix Glitch, which basically heals your slammer in play 5, but then randomly swaps out the slammer, which unfortunately we got Heat Blast, but he is still pretty decent. And going back to the stun status effect, I realized that I'd assumed wrong as the forearms was able to attack here, and later reading its description, I found out that the stun status effect only makes it to where the slammer doesn't get an ability point that turn. So technically they can still attack, but it can slow the opponent down from using their bigger moves. And if you're wondering, the stun in the earlier battles literally does nothing as the opponent doesn't have any ability points because their slammers aren't a high enough level to use the moves that use the ability points. And like I mentioned how I assumed the stun wouldn't let you attack, there actually is a different status effect that does that, but in this game it's named Paralyze, but we don't see anyone using that until way later on. And looking back at the battle, the forearms dealt 8 damage to our Heat Blast, getting it down to 8 health, but then the forearms was taken out by the burn effect inflicted on it, which brought in Kevin's last slammer, which was Humongosaur. And Humongosaur, even though it's a pretty big damage dealer, you can see that it only had 1 support point each round, which I'm realizing now the opponent had a nerfed Humongosaur because it's actually supposed to give you 2 support points each round, which is still pretty atrocious. And so I continued on attacking, taking some pretty heavy damage myself, until eventually I used this one last Flame Blast, dealing 3 damage and inflicting it with burn, and then my Heat Blast was taken out, but of course the Humongosaur was also taken down with the burn effect, earning me again only 5 golden credits. So this time I didn't really bother going into the slammer shop and jumped right into the next battle against Julie, who if you're unfamiliar is Ben's ex-girlfriend in the show. Before the battle starts, Ben says, "Julie, I didn't know you're into card games," and she replies with, "There's a lot you never learned about me, Ben. Now give me your best shot." So the battle starts off with this time me using blocks as my starter, as I was just testing out different things, and I hadn't given this alien a shot to see just how good it was. My first move was playing the Kevin Levin support card, which deals 3 damage and stun 1 for 2 turns, and then of course I also used the extended punch from blocks, which dealt 5 damage, which this was the main thing that showed me that feedback was the better starter, as its normal attack dealt 1 more damage but also applied the shock effect to enemies, and blocks' attack doesn't do any status effects but just does straight 5 damage. Oh, and they both give you 7 support points. And since it was my turn again, I used the Proto Tech Armor support card, which reduces incoming damage by 2 but also removes a stun effect from us if we have one, which at this point we didn't, but the reducing 2 incoming damage was good enough to play that card anyways. And as I ended my turn and the Kevin Levin support card dealt 3 damage, stunning the opponent, it went into the discard pile as it had now been 2 turns. And the opponent with his extended punch dealt 3 damage since we had the support card down, but then and also they played this card which gave them 3 support points and an extra support card, which allowed them to place the same card that we were using as well. My next move was playing the Hang In There support card, which I've already mentioned heals 2 every round for 6 rounds, and then I also played the Proto Tool Slash, which deals 5 damage, but it only dealt 3 since the opponent had that 1 support card reducing the 2 damage, but I mainly played it because I knew that my blocks could take it down, which it did. And as it transferred over to Julie's turn, she switched into Wild Vine, and I ended up using a Pokemon move on me named Vine Whip, which is supposed to deal 2 damage, and it also applied poison onto me. Now poison, instead of dealing a straight up 5 damage like burn does, in this game instead it works kind of like the shock effect, because let's say I have 5 poison on me, by the end of the turn it'll deal 5 damage to me, and then the counter would go down by 1, and the next turn it'd deal 4. So the more you stack it, the more damage it deals, and on top of that it ignores all damage reduction cards, so if used properly it can be pretty overpowered. But again, a poison status effect problem isn't something we ever run into, and eventually after a few more exchange of attacks, I got this 1 support card named Omnitrix Switch It Up, which basically allows you to select a new slammer to use, and it gives that slammer an extra attack, which you might have noticed a mistake that I made right here, and it was not using blocks as attack before I switched over, because if I'd used its attack I could have dealt that damage and then also used feedback's attack. But at the time I didn't know this, and I'd actually noticed what the wording said and kind of just assumed that feedback would get 2 attacks instead of 1. But of course the game showed me that that wasn't the case, and next time I'd have to use my attack before switching over. And honestly, of course, this wasn't too detrimental to the battle as we were winning by a lot. And eventually I used a 5 damage support card and feedback's normal attack to take down the Wild Vine, leaving only Julie's Wild Mutt to go up against. And Wild Mutt was another alien that wasn't really too good in the game, as it only dealt 4 damage to me and no other status effects, and on top of that it only gave Julie 2 support points. So after a couple of turns I was able to take it down completely, beating Julie and this time earning myself 10 golden credits, with our next opponent being Gwen. Now Gwen had a pretty strong team, being gray matter, feedback, and blocks, so the only main difference between our team and her teams was the heat blast and the gray matter. But if you remember, I mentioned that gray matter gives you 10 support points normally, but since this was still the beginner levels of the game, her gray matter only gave her 6, so you couldn't really call it a full powered match. And without any support cards being played, I took down the gray matter while it got down my feedback to about half health. And you might notice here that I have 21 support points, but I can't actually use any of the support cards, or at least it wouldn't make sense to use any that deal damage because the azimuth is taken down, and for some reason the game doesn't switch over to the next alien until it's the opponent's turn. I don't really know why it was implemented like that. I think it definitely would have made more sense if the person had to choose their alien as soon as the first one got taken down. But either way, we're now up against her blocks, who again was weaker than our blocks, only giving her 4 support points compared to our 7, and I had a lot of support points saved up, so I used a Tachyon Cannon dealing 20 damage, and then using feedback's live wire attack to completely take down blocks in 1 turn, leaving only Gwen's feedback, and using a couple more damaging support cards and our feedback spark storm attack, we got it down to 1 singular health, which then on her turn she took down my feedback, but then I switched over to blocks using the extended punch, taking down her final slammer, meaning we'd won against her, and this time we got 20 credits, so the amount of credits we're getting was definitely ramping up. And now our second to last opponent of the Bellwood tournament would be Billy Billions. But before we fought against him, I thought it was now time to buy another slammer since we had enough credits, and after looking around at all the affordable ones, I came to the conclusion that my best choice would be Spider Monkey, as it has some solid support cards, pretty good damage dealing, and it gives you 7 support points every round. Oh, and I also used my remaining 25 credits to level some characters up. I got Spider Monkey to level 2, unlocking its second ability. Blocks also leveled up to level 2, unlocking its second ability. And then I got my feedback to level 3, giving it 2 more HP and an extra support card. And I don't believe I've mentioned it yet, but if you're curious, the max level on a slammer is level 10. But that aside, it was now time to take down Billy Billions, who's like a rich side villain of the story. But focusing on the game, I chose Spider Monkey as my first slot, blocks as my second slot, and feedback as my third slot. And on his team, he of course had the Billy Billions Slammer alongside Zombozo and a card named the Mutilator, which I don't specifically remember from when I watched the show, but I'm just assuming it's another side villain. And as for the new Spider Monkey Slammer that we unlocked, we had 2 attacks on it, one of which was Spider Kick that deals a solid 6 damage, and then there's one named Web Swing which costs 2 agility points, and that one, when using it, it gives you Fortify 2 and Haste 2. Fortify, you guys already know, it just makes you take less damage, and Haste is pretty cool because it gives you one extra turn for every round that you have it. So here it used one of the hastes and it gave me a second attack that I could do on that same round. And then since I still have another haste on the next round, it'll give me 2 attacks as well. So it has a pretty cool effect. Oh, and there's also this confused status effect that the opponent applied on me. And this basically at the end of your round discards a card from your hand. Also, in my opinion, it's probably the most powerful status effect in the game. And you'll see why a little later on. But that's really the only main things I wanted to touch on in this battle. As for now, since this is still the beginner tournament, it's really easy. There were some cool support cards like this Megawatt Disruption, which saps 10 support energy each round from your opponent, and that guy can be pretty annoying, but we're eventually able to overcome it, defeating Billy Billions and receiving 30 credits for our win. And this had gotten me up to 35 golden credits, which I used to level up Feedback twice and unlock his third ability. And afterwards, our next and final opponent of the Bellwood tournament was Mazuma, who basically in the show is Billy Billions' super powered robot assistant. So looking to the right, you can see that she also had Billy Billions on her team alongside Dr. Psychobos and Slamworm. Now looking at the new attack that we unlocked for Feedback, it was named Feedback and it gave the opponent Shock 3, Stun 1 while giving ourselves Charge 3. Oh, and it cost 2 ability points. But I'm going to be completely honest, we literally never end up using that attack, as the first 2 attacks are just much better to spend the ability points on. And eventually, after some back and forth attacks, we're able to take down all of Mazuma's slammers, getting the victory over her, obtaining 50 golden credits, and becoming the champ of Bellwood, which Rook very quickly humbles us, telling us that that was only the first division, and now it was time to head into Undertown, which in the show is basically a town underneath of Bellwood, where sort of all the other aliens have created a society. But before we headed there, I took the time to level up my Feedback to level 7, as it was my favorite slammer that I had so far, and I was trying to get it all the way up to level 10. And to be completely honest, looking back, even though Feedback seemed like the best one that I had at the time, I now know that Blocks was actually probably the best one, as some of his abilities literally make him unkillable. He just happens to have some insane regeneration abilities, which every other slammer can't really do much against. This strategy kind of just elongates the games and makes it not fun to play. With that aside, I now started looking at all the other slammers, trying to see what my best team would be for the endgame. And the first one that caught my eye was Accelerate. 1, because it was the most expensive card, and 2, it had a bunch of very strong abilities, which either dealt a lot of damage, gave you a lot of support points to use, or just discarded a lot of cards from your opponent's hand. The second slammer slash alien that caught my eye was Cannonbolt. Again, it was one of the more expensive ones, giving you a lot of support points, but my favorite part was all of its abilities kind of centered around dealing high damage and just focusing on discarding your opponent's cards that they have in their hand. And you're going to see that this probably, alongside Blocks, is the most broken card in the game, but I saw Accelerate and Cannonball as sort of support cards and still needed a heavy attacker, so my first choice was Humongosaur, but you might have seen there that it has that atrocious 2 support points every round, but it does deal an insane amount of damage. And then my second option was Forearms, so instead of 2 support points, it gives you 4, and similarly to Humongosaur, it deals tremendous damage, alongside his biggest ability being able to discard all cards from your opponent's hand, which when seeing this, it kind of solidified that I was going to choose Forearms instead of Humongosaur. But you're also going to see later on that that last ability is kind of unrealistic because it ends up costing too many ability points. But all that card unlocking is for later on, as now we're about to take on Solid Plug from Undertown as our first battle. My team of course consisted of Feedback, Spider Monkey, and Blocks, while his consisted of Bug Lizard, Malware, and Diamond Head, which we took down Bug Lizard pretty easily with a couple of Feedback's attacks alongside some of our support cards. And then our opponent sent in Diamond Head, who we try to take down as fast as possible because Diamond Head does have that charge ability, so the more you allow him to attack, the more damage he starts dealing over time. But this was also when the opponent started using some pretty annoying support cards like the Muroids, which would paralyze your character for 1 turn. And if you remember, Paralyze makes it to where your slammer can't deal damage for 1 turn, and you kind of just have to rely on your support cards to deal that damage for you. There was also this one support card I really liked, even though it cost 10 points, and basically you would take 2 less damage from attacks, but then the opponent would also get dealt 2 damage back to them. And even better, it lasted for 4 whole rounds, making it very consistently annoying for the opponent. And eventually our Feedback did fall to the Malware's Particle Beam, but then I sent in Spider Monkey using 1 Spider Kick, taking the Malware down, getting our victory against Solid Plug and earning 40 credits, leading us to our next opponent, who was Rook himself, and his team consisted of NRG, Shock Squatch, and Crash Hopper. NRG is more of just a defensive card that applies burn to your characters. Shock Squatch is very similar to Feedback and it applies the shock status, and Crash Hopper you can just think of as a damage dealer. And without any trouble at all, I was able to take down the NRG while only being dealt a little bit of damage to my feedback, which then the opponent sends in their Crash Hopper attacking, but it doesn't deal any damage to me as I had 2 support cards that reduce damage, and slowly but surely using feedback's attacks and our support cards, we took down the Crash Hopper, leaving only the Shock Squatch to go up against. And on this specific turn, I had the Omnitrix Switch It Up card in my hand, so this time I first used my feedback's attack dealing 8 damage, and then used the Omnitrix card to switch over to the Spider Monkey, using Spider Kick and the support card to get the Shock Squatch down to 1 HP. And then on our next turn, I used one last Spider Kick to take him down, granting our win against Rook and 45 golden credits. And since we had 95 credits in total, I went back to the Slammer shop and started upgrading my feedback, getting him all the way up to level 10 and unlocking his last Overload ability, which you'll get to see me use in our battle against Pax. On his team, Pax has Spider Monkey, Ball Weevil, and Cannonbolt, so we definitely have to be a little wary of that Cannonbolt, but at the same time I wasn't too worried as my feedback had gotten pretty overpowered. And using one normal live wire attack on it, got the Cannonbolt down to 18 health, which by this point we now had 4 ability points, and that was as many as we needed for the Overload ability. And using the Overload ability, you'll see that it deals a pretty significant 20 damage, and you'll also notice that both mine and the enemy's support points both went to 0. And simply put, that's exactly what the Overload ability does. 20 damage to the opponent, but then it also saps all the energy that both of us have. So the main strategy before using it is making sure that we use all of our support points that we have, so that we don't end up just wasting them. And eventually, since we'd taken down the opponent's Spider Monkey and Cannonbolt, leaving only the Ball Weevil, which we took down very quickly, getting us our win and another 50 credits, which leads us into our battle against Esther, who on her team had Feedback, Kick and Hawk, and Shock Squatch. And again, I used the same damage reducing and damage dealing support cards, very easily just annihilating her whole team without losing any of ours and getting 60 golden credits for it. And I'm going pretty fast on these battles because it's kind of just the same thing over and over again, as I was just spam using Feedback, Spider Monkey, and blocks. Even our battle against Pacmar was pretty similar. He on his team had Wild Wine, Humongousaur, and Crabdozer, and his Humongousaur had a lot of health at 31, but again, I keep mentioning it, but that 2 support points kind of just holds back Humongousaur way too much, and eventually it just gets taken down without being much of a threat. Pacmar also had Crabdozer, which had similarly 31 health to Humongousaur, and it actually got the opponent 4 support points each round, but by the time it came in, it was literally a 3v1 against all my Slammers and that one Crabdozer. So even though it took down my Feedback and Spider Monkey, I was able to very easily take it down using my blocks. But you might have noticed that this battle I lost more Slammers than I had in any previous battle, so things were definitely starting to pick up a little bit, and I would need to start investing in my future team very quickly. And thankfully we got 70 credits this battle, meaning we're very close to that 200 mark that we needed for the Accelerate. And this also brought us to the last battle of the Undertown tournament, and it was against Hokastar, who had Forearms, Billy Billions, and Siphon, which before the battle we talked to him and he said that he was only in it for the money. And that makes complete sense, as in the show Hokastar is a con man. But looking back at the battle, this specific fight was probably the closest one in the entire game for me, because at this point the opponent had some pretty high level cards at level 6 for all 3, while I still only had my Feedback at max level and my other 2 at level 2, and the opponent's cards weren't nerfed like they were in the beginner tournament. They were now actually on par with the cards that we had. And after a few rounds, my Feedback was at 19 health and the opponent's Forearms was at 20 health. But if you look at my support points, you'll see that I have 21 and a Tachyon cannon in hand, so I took down the Forearms immediately, giving me a pretty big lead. But this was actually where things started going bad as well, as the opponent sent in his Siphon and then played this support card, which deals 4 damage to my character each round and also confuses my Slammer for 1 round for 2 turns, meaning with Siphon's Stunning Fist attack, we're taking 9 damage in total each round, and then that Stunning Fist attack also stuns my Feedback, not giving me any ability points, which was actually very bad since I was saving up 4 ability points to use Feedback's final attack. But since Siphon's most normal attack literally stuns me every single round, it means that I could never get to that point, and my options were either Spark Storm or the Feedback attack. So for now, I just used a 0 ability point attack, hoping that maybe Siphon wouldn't use his Stunning Fist, which surprisingly he actually didn't, but then his other attack dealt so much damage that the Dimension 12 robot was able to take down the Feedback. And even worse, I was never going to get my attack off since he played 2 Dimension 12 robots. And it may seem like I'm in the lead here since I still have 2 full HP Slammers, but if you remember, they're both level 2, so their full HP is still the same as that Siphon being at like 60% HP. And even worse, the confusion effect that we're getting from the opponent's support card meant that my hand was slowly dwindling away. So for now, I I just used the normal spider kick and used my healing support card, which heals me 2 each round for 6 turns, but that 2 heal isn't nearly enough anymore, as my spider monkey literally lost half of its health within 1 round. But on the right side, we had gotten the siphon pretty low, and by the end of our turn, he was down to 4 HP, meaning one more attack would take him down. But then the opponent played this insane card, innate cost card, which stays for 5 turns, and it reduces all incoming damage by 4. Now this was genuinely scary, because with this card in play, my spider monkey can only deal 2 damage at a time, and my blocks, when it comes in, can only deal 1 damage. So my only hope at this point was stalling out that 5 turns that the card would be in play. And thankfully I had a support card which helped me with that, which healed me 5 and then also sapped the opponent from 5 support points, giving us a better chance to survive, and it also meant that the opponent wouldn't be able to play too strong of a support card. And of course we still had the healing card in play. But then just as the siphon was 1 attack away from being defeated, the opponent started playing this card, which we've already seen before, and it paralyzes your slammer for 1 turn, so I just wasn't able to attack. And the siphon was getting my spider monkey down pretty low, eventually to 3 health. But then something crazier even happened where the opponent played this. The card was named Mecha Suit, and for 4 turns it would reduce incoming damage by 3. So it now meant that the opponent was taking 7 less damage every turn, and I basically didn't have a way to defeat him besides my MK12 blaster. And honestly at this point I just needed to use it to take down the siphon. But the bad thing about that specific card is it makes me discard another card from my hand. So for now I chose to go with the Proto Tool Slash, as it literally does nothing. And then as I ended my turn, my spider monkey ended up dying to the burn effect that the siphon caused to us, meaning now it was a 1v1 against my blocks and the opponent's billions, which at this point I'd lost complete hope, as the opponent used another one of these cards, reducing the incoming damage by another 4. And of course I literally didn't have those cards, so my blocks was consistently taking damage. So at this point I'd completely lost hope and thought that I'd lost. But this was also the point when I learned that blocks was probably the most overpowered card in the game, and it was because of his second ability named Rebuild, which heals him 5 and gives him Regenerate 1 alongside removing all status effects from himself. And 2 of those are pretty self-explanatory, which are heal 5 and removing all of the status effects. After using the move, I learned that the Regenerate effect is literally just another heal 5 at the end of the turn, meaning that that attack heals me 10, and since it only costs 1 ability point, it means that I'm basically able to use it every single turn, unless I'm stunned of course. But since we'd taken out the siphon, it basically meant that the opponent didn't have a lot of stun effects, and I could sort of just keep on using the rebuild ability over and over again until 1, I just completely stalled out the opponent from those support cards that he's playing, or 2, I saved up enough support points that I was able to use the extremely heavy hitting support cards like the Tachyon Cannon. And if you just look at how many ability points Billions has, you can tell it's literally been 5 rounds since we both played our blocks and Billions. And my blocks is now still at full health while his Billions is at very low HP. And even with all the damaging support cards that he has, he can get me down to very low health amounts, but then I literally just use rebuild again and get back up to nearly full HP. So this strategy was definitely very broken, and you have to keep in mind my blocks is literally only level 2. But eventually one last punch from blocks was able to take down the opponent, meaning we'd won the tournament and gotten 100 golden credits, becoming the champion of Undertown. But now Rook told us that we'd be battling in a tournament at the Plumber Academy, which would be our first interplanetary division. But before we went over there, it was now time to unlock Accelerate, and of course level it up as much as we could, getting it up to level 6. And heading over to the Plumber Academy, our first battle was against the Riedel brothers, which this time my team composition had changed to Accelerate, Feedback, and Blocks. And you're about to see exactly why I chose to get Accelerate as my first character out of the 3 that I'd selected from before. And one of the main reasons is its normal attack, which only deals 3 damage, but it gives you 2 support points and 1 extra ability point, meaning that by turn 2 you're able to get to 3 ability points, which allows you to use its 3rd and 4th attack. Now of course I don't have the 4th attack unlocked yet, but honestly the 3rd attack is very menacing itself. It deals 12 damage, saps 6 support points and discards 3 cards from the opponent's hand. The only downside to it is that it gives yourself stun 1. Oh, and if you're curious what its second attack does, it's literally the same exact thing as Spider Monkey, giving itself haste 2 and fortify 2. But the main thing is that third attack, which deals a pretty decent amount of damage, and then even more importantly, discarding 3 cards from your opponent's hand. And I've been talking about how overpowered the discarding thing is in this game, but I haven't mentioned exactly why. And basically, to explain my reasoning, if you remember towards the beginning of the video, I mentioned that the support cards end up being a lot more powerful than your actual aliens themselves. And basically, if you just keep on making the opponent discard cards from their hand, they can only use 1 support card per turn, no matter how many support points they have. Now, forcing the opponent to only have 1 support card in their hand every turn is very difficult to do with only Accelerate, as it only has that 1 attack that makes them lose the cards, and after using that attack you get stun on yourself, so you're basically not able to get ability points for a couple of turns. But that's exactly where you're gonna see Cannonbolt come in later. And like I mentioned, even though Accelerate can't perma make the opponent only have 1 card in their hand every turn, discarding any amount of cards from their hand is very solid, as it just gives them less and less options to choose from, and it kind of makes it to where they can't keep on spamming their support cards, kind of like Hokastar did in that last battle. The only real downside to Accelerate is that it deals 3 damage with that first attack, but like I already mentioned, it gives you 3 extra support points, and on top of the 6 that it already gives you, it makes it 9 in total. So those in a way balance out the damage. Oh, and also Accelerate came with some pretty decent support cards, like this one tactical advantage card that costs 6, and for 4 turns it'll give you 1 extra support card each turn. And in this game, the more variety you have of support cards to choose from in your hand, the better. But explanations aside, I was eventually able to take down the Rito brothers, getting myself 95 credits for the win and putting them straight into upgrading Accelerate to level 10. And looking to the top right, you can see that our next opponent was Jerry, who had Crash Hopper, Shock Squatch, and Wild Mutt. And he started our conversation off with "I'm not useless, you know." And then Ben apologized for insulting him at some point in the past. And then Jerry went about how he has all kinds of talents and abilities, has an engineering degree, and speaks 3 languages. Oh, and that he's a great card player. He cooks, he does yoga, he's an award-winning bird caller. But then Ben gets annoyed and says, "Just play." This Jerry kind of reminded me of the Rick and Morty Jerry. And honestly, I'm going to start going through the easy battles a lot quicker and only stop when there's important things introduced. And to start in this battle, the important thing was using Accelerate's final attack, which gives you 8 support points, makes you draw 4 cards, but then discard 2 of them, and then also gives you +1 action. So basically just a very support heavy move. And the good thing about this one was, again, it only costs 3 ability points, and unlike the other 3 ability point move, it doesn't give you stun. And then of course I can use my support cards like the laser pistol, which deals 5 damage each turn to the opponent for 2 turns, allowing me to slowly but surely take down all the opposing slammers, and getting me 100 golden credits, which meant there were 1 win away from getting Cannonball. And our next opponent would be Patilidae, who on his team had Spider Monkey, Astrodactyl, and lastly Echo, all again very quickly taken down, accruing me 110 golden credits, which of course finally allowed me to unlock Cannonball and also get him up to level 3. And here, even though I knew that blocks was technically better than feedback, I still kept feedback on the team. Main reason being that feedback was already level 10 and that I was more so looking for damage than trying to stall out my opponents. Oh, and talking about opponents, my next opponent was Argit, who kind of like Hokastar was using very annoying support cards, especially this Gwen Mana Shield, which costs 7, stays for 3 turns, and blocks incoming damage by 5. And since he had 2 of them down, it meant that I was dealing 10 less damage every turn. But eventually the timers on those did run out, and I was finally able to deal damage, taking down the opponent's Grey Matter, and then also his Zombozo, and lastly Bug Lizard as well, getting me 120 credits, and putting me up against Reba, the second to last opponent of this tournament. You might have noticed I didn't really mention Cannibal in the last battle, or really even this one, and that's mainly because I hadn't really figured out its true potential in these battles, and I'll more so mention him when I start using him heavily. Oh, and in this battle, my Accelerate and Cannonball got nearly down to 0 HP, but then I had 30 support points saved up and a Tachyon cannon in hand, so the Heat Blast didn't really stand a chance. And this battle got me 130 credits, but now we were up against Rook, who was the final opponent of the Plumber Academy tournament, and his team consisted of Diamond Head, Echo, and Shock Squatch. Well, my team now started off with Cannonball, went second with Accelerate, and the third slot was for feedback. Rook tells us that he'd been studying the game and that he wanted a rematch, and then Ben told him that he shouldn't bite off more than he can chew, but Rook, not really understanding human phrases, says that he failed to see what his rate of food intake has to do with the game, and Ben replies with, "It's not what he meant, but let's see what you can do." So our battle begins, opponents. And this is where I realized just how overpowered Cannonbolt was, because one, his rollout ability does 6 damage, discards a hand from the opponent's hand, but then also puts confusion on the opponent's slammer, meaning that the end of Rook's turn, he's also going to lose another card from his hand. And in even simpler terms, it meant that one attack from Cannonbolt made the opponent lose 2 cards from his hand. And the best thing is that that move literally is free, so I don't have to worry about stun effects or anything. And spamming it over and over again literally means that Rook in a couple of turns will start to have only 1 card in his hand every single turn. And the only way he can really draw multiple support cards is if he has a support card that draws cards. But if you think about it, if he uses one of those cards, he uses his support points, so then he can't play the cards that he just drew, meaning in my turn I can just get rid of those cards from his hand again. Oh, and even better, if the opponent doesn't stun me, allowing me to get the ability points, I can just use the 3rd and 4th attack of Cannonbolt that deal a massive amount of damage. This card is genuinely broken, and to be completely honest, there's either a bug or a developer mistake in the game, because the rollout ability from Cannonbolt isn't supposed to put the confuse effect on the opponent. The only thing the description says that it's supposed to do is deal 6 damage and discard 1 card from their hand, but for some reason that confusion effect gets applied, making that ability basically just overpowered. And when you combo it with Accelerate's insane support, the matches kind of become unlosable. So we took down Rook, becoming the champions of the Plumber Academy and getting ourselves 160 golden credits. And then Rook tells us that we're going to the finals of the Ben 10 Slammers Galactic Tournament, which then we ask where it's going to be held, and he tells us it's on Galvin Prime, where we'll be facing off our toughest opponents yet. Now the first of these tough opponents was Queen Rumbletum, but before we fight her, you might have noticed there's still a piece of the puzzle missing, and we hadn't bought our main attacker yet. So before I made the decision of who I wanted to bring in alongside Cannonbolt and Accelerate, I was looking at all the different characters in the game, comparing their health, support, and damage, but for some reason everyone just has the same amount of damage besides characters like Billy Billions and Grey Matter who have a little less, except for Humongosaur who has 4 damage, max health, and 0 support. But again, like I've mentioned many times throughout this video, support is very important in this game, so my final decision was to go with Forearms. And after using 160 credits unlocking him, I still had a few left over, so I got him up to level 6 as well. And just like that, our squad was ready to take on Galvin Prime. But honestly, I can't sit here and act like all the battles moving forward were super tough, because for the most part, I kind of just spammed the same moves over and over again, and they kind of just carried me throughout the battles, with this battle awarding me 150 credits after completion, and our next opponent was Princess Luma. But before we battled her, we did now have enough credits to get Forearms to level 10, and honestly, just looking at her character arsenal, I knew that this battle was going to be pretty easy, as she had both Forearms and Humongosaur, meaning her support wasn't really good at all, and the only real chance she had was with Kyber, who did put up a good fight, getting my Forearms and my Cannonbolt down a decent amount of health. But as soon as she switched over to Humongosaur, things got much easier. And to be honest about something, in all the battles within Galvin Prime, I definitely did lose more slammers than I did in the previous tournaments, but that was mainly because all the opponents were max level, and unless you're specifically using blocks, there isn't really a guaranteed way where you can win without losing anyone. So even though it seemed like I was taking a lot of damage, usually losing 1, sometimes even 2 characters per battle, it was always in a way guaranteed that I was gonna win, because the opponent couldn't pull out any surprise support card combos, and the payouts were now very hefty towards the end of this tournament, which was of course very good for us, because one of the main things that we needed for the 100% was unlocking every character in the game, which I did start to do here. But you won't see me playing with any other characters, since all of them were just level 1 and it didn't make sense to level them up because it'd be wasting credits. But I would be down to do another video on the game and use completely different characters the next time. But for now, I was kind of just annihilating every single opponent using my team, with this battle against Rad Dudesman getting me 220 credits. And our next opponent was Ben 23 from Dimension 23. But again, nothing too difficult, and this battle got us 275 credits, allowing me to unlock NRG, Shock Squatch, Kick and Hawk, Musulator, and lastly Kyber. And our next / second to last opponent of the entire game was Professor Paradox, who in the show is a time traveler and basically one of the strongest characters in the entire universe. But that skill did not transfer over to Ben 10 Slammers, as he kind of got annihilated, giving me 380 credits, and now leaving us with our final battle against Azimuth, who you can tell he had a pretty decent team with Accelerate, Diamond Head, and Echo Echo. And the conversation started off with Ben saying that he figured Azimuth would be too busy to be here, but then Azimuth said that he was the best player in the entire galaxy and that he he should win, which Ben then added that there is no way Azimuth was beating him, but then Azimuth replies with it's just a simple matter of calculating all possible outcomes and then executing the appropriate strategy. So kind of like Doctor Strange and Avengers. So looking back at the battle, I started off with a rollout using my cannon bolt, making Azimuth discard a card from his hand and putting Confuse on the Accelerate. Then his Accelerate used Sideswipe, doing okay damage, but also giving him extra support points and an ability point, which then he used the extra support points to use a 5 damage support card. And this first turn wasn't bad, but I'd have to be careful on the second turn since I knew he'd have 3 ability points and could use some pretty powerful moves on me. So I made the play that made the most sense, and he was using the Rook Blanco snare, which deals 5 damage, but more importantly, it puts stun on the Accelerate, meaning that it can't get any ability points in the next turn, which forces Azimuth to use one of the weaker moves, but then he got pretty lucky with the support card he drew, and it was the Omnitrix switch it up. So of course, he made the smart move and switched over to Diamond Head, but he also did make the same exact mistake I made at the beginning of the game and not using Accelerate's attack first before switching over. So all that stuff about calculating every single move kind of went out the window here because he made the most basic mistake in the entire game. Oh, and if you look at the top right under Azimuth, you'll see a card with a 0 on top of it, and that basically shows you how many cards he has in his hand, and it's 0 since I kept using the rollout ability with my cannon bolt. So in this entire situation, we're in a pretty heavy lead, and just to make sure there aren't any powerful moves being used, I kept using the Rook Blanco snare, giving it more stun, but then Azimuth drew the 0 cost card, which is named the Omnitrix Glitch, and basically it heals your Slammer 5 and then it switches into a different Slammer. So back came Accelerate, which I wasn't too mad at, but again, it was very scary because if it went over to his turn, he already had 2 ability points and he would get his 3rd. So again, I knew I had to counteract this by first using my attack on him, but then using the support card named Who's Next, which makes your opponent randomly select a new Slammer. So he was forced to use Diamond Head again. And then when it seemed like my cannon bolt was getting low on health, I used a support card which saps 5 from the opponent and heals my cannon bolt 5 alongside the 0 cost Omnitrix Glitch, which of course I don't get to select my Slammer, and I would have preferred forearms here so I could one-shot Accelerate when it comes in, but the game randomly gave me Accelerate and I was kind of just gonna have to play with it. Oh, Azimuth did get pretty lucky here, drawing into an Azimuth support card, and basically it's probably the best thing he could have gotten as it's a 12 cost card and it gives him 2 extra support cards every single turn, and this is for 4 turns. But even with that support card, I wasn't too worried as my lead was pretty tremendous, and using a side swipe I was able to take down Diamond Head, leaving only a very low health Accelerate and 1 Echo on his team, which instead of Accelerate he did send in Echo, and this was actually good for me because if he sent in the Accelerate it would have meant that he could have used the 3 ability point attack, but this did just delay it a little bit, and eventually I got the Echo down to 8 health, but then I lost my Accelerate to its Echo Chamber attack, and now since Echo and Accelerate were both at 8 HP or lower, the correct move for me here was switching into forearms, and that's because his most basic ability deals 8 damage to the opponent, meaning it would one-shot both of them, and just like that we had won the battle, obtaining an insane 600 golden credits and Azimuth announcing us as the Ben 10 Slammers champion. And as far as the story goes, that's kind of just it. Ben 10 doesn't say anything in response to this. This is literally the last dialogue of the entire game, and we're kind of just sent back to this screen, meaning now there was only one more thing left to do, which was unlocking every other Slammer. So first I went to the Slammers page, unlocking Slammers like Grey Matter and Slamworm, but then I realized that this page was a little laggy, so I switched over to this battle menu and unlocked Dr. Psychobos, Echo, Malware, Diamond Head, and lastly Humongosaur, meaning we still had 6 more Slammers that we needed to unlock. And this was where kind of an annoying grind started because I'd assumed that if I just played against Azimuth again, I'd get another 600 credits, but sadly that number had now been reduced down to 50, which then I did unlock Zombozo, but I was about to have to beat Azimuth many more times until I had enough credits for all the other Slammers. So I started my battles against him. I did even try to go into the free play mode of the game, which basically you spin this random wheel going against 3 random Slammers, and then you fight against those 3, but winning this only gave me 10 credits and was kind of a waste of time, so I went back to bullying Azimuth, eventually getting enough credits to unlock Grav Attack, leaving 4 more Slammers. But there's not much more point in explaining anything else, and after this one final battle of defeating Azimuth, I went over to the Slammer store buying Astrodactyl, Crash Hopper, Billions, and at last Siphon, meaning we'd finally unlocked every single Slammer in the game, and there wasn't really much else to do. So let me know what you thought about the game in the comments, and if there's any any other games you want me to 100%. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye bye.